afternoon. This is Jeremy Koulish reporting for Main Street Insider. I'm so pleased to be able to be joined today by Miss Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro from Connecticut, who has introduced the National Infrastructure Development Bank Act, which we summarized and can be found on our website, mainstreetinsider.org. Thank you for being here.
Well, it's wonderful to be here talking with you about an issue I care deeply about, and happy to have the opportunity to do it.
All right. So what does the Infrastructure Bank actually do?
Well, let's put it into perspective. I happen to think it's an important moment for the concept of an infrastructure bank and the financing of public investment. There are a couple of dynamics that are moving this forward. One is the size of the federal deficit, which makes traditional financing, or conventional financing, if you will, for infrastructure less likely, and having to find new ways to look at investment in infrastructure. And secondly, the need for a national growth policy and how we put the U.S. economy on a track for future economic growth, economic security for families. I'm not talking here about a stimulus program, a recovery program. The focus is, how is it that we're going to be able to, in the United States, create jobs, increase wages, and compete with the economic power centers of the world, the global market as well. And it is about creating good paying jobs here and middle-class jobs for families. That's what this is all about. How do we do it with an infrastructure bank? It's a public-private partnership, so it's getting public resources, private resources together, and then to be able to use these resources and focus on a diverse range of infrastructure, public infrastructure, and invest in that. And that diverse range includes energy, smart grid, the environment, water projects, wastewater projects, roads, bridges, telecommunications, expansion of broadband. The United States is 15th in the world today in broadband, and how that can link up rural America as well as some of the rural parts of our more metropolitan areas. And so it is coalescing those resources to focus on how we deal with the infrastructure for the future, keeping in mind that these are the kinds of jobs that are created that cannot be outsourced, and they create a path for people for the future. It also helps to develop technology and keep the United States at the cutting edge of technology in these areas of energy and environment and telecommunications, etc. It is other areas of the world, a number of states, California, South Carolina, other states have state infrastructure banks. Other parts of the world, the European Investment Bank is an Asian Development Bank. When we look at countries around the globe, China today is spending 9% of its GDP on infrastructure growth. India is not that far behind. It used to be 8% in the United States, and now it's down to 2%. And we have investors, rather than them sitting on the sidelines or investing overseas, they ought to be investing in infrastructure in the United States. And this is the kind of an entity that can make that happen.
Okay. So in asking around and doing research on this bill, I've come across two major objections to this that are, based on substantive issues. One is that this sort of public-private partnership would take a lot of power out of the traditional funding, the traditional funding authority that Congress has to fund these kind of investments. And this would essentially strip them of that power.
Well,
how would you respond?
right, very easily. This is not meant to supplant the, and particularly in transportation, not meant to supplant the current projects, current programs like the TIFIA program, the Build America bonds, other kinds of efforts, the Tiger grants, et cetera. It's not meant to supplant that, but what we need to do, and the other point I would make, which I think is a very strong point, normally the way we look at where the funding goes, in terms of these projects, is the decisions are made on geography and on politics. This is an opportunity to depoliticize this process as well. Gets it out of this area of earmarks and more on the analytical side of a project that is of national significance and something that will increase the economic opportunity broadly. And there isn't a place now where you have this broad range. I'm not talking about one specific area. This is a broad range of infrastructure which we would need to focus on. And in addition to that, in order that one can get private investors, and I'm not talking about privatization, I want to get their capital and I want to use it for building in the United States. This is a nation that's been built on bricks and mortar and fiber optics. And this is about building America and creating jobs. And so to get the scale of investment that one needed so that you get institutional investors, pension funds, sovereign wealth funds, that people will be willing to purchase a bond and the proceeds of that bond, they work out the interest rate with the bank, they purchase those bonds, the proceeds of those bonds are then coupled with the municipality, with the state, with a region in creating this effort. Can I give you a good example of how this can work?
Please.
Los Angeles has something called the 3010 Project. Mayor Villaraigosa, who testified on supporting of an infrastructure bank, because they need to rebuild their transit system, and they put together their plan, and what they had to do is they went to the folks from Los Angeles, and they, through referendum, they increased their sales tax by 1/2 cent in order to pay for this. So that's a dedicated revenue stream for this project. It's intended, I think it's a $40 billion project to take 30 years. What he wants to do, and how a bank could help him, is that if he could get a loan from the bank, this is a project that could be done in 10 years versus 30 years. That already brings down the cost of the project.
So that's where 30.
That's the 30-10. He wants to go from 30 to 10, and he has a defined revenue stream in order to pay back the loan and to give the investor return on an investment. So that really is a model for what could happen, which is why he's so out front in the debate on it. This concept, by the way, has broad support. The U.S. Chamber is very supportive of it. At the same time, the unions. At the same time, the Governors Association, Governor Rendell, Governor Schwarzenegger, Mayor Bloomberg, they have the program Rebuilding America, and Governor Rendell has testified. The Governors Association put together a resolution in support of this effort. You've got the general contractors, the civil engineers. We're told that it's about $2.2 trillion in a shortfall. There aren't enough. We can't get to federal resources in this way. We just don't have the money to do it. We've got to have a cooperative relationship with the private sector.
And this actually brings me to the second concern I've heard, is that this program would essentially be spending by another name, a way to get the revenue that you need and the $250 billion of investment, but doing it in a way that's off the books. So it would just serve as
No, it would have to be capitalized. And when we talk about public-private, And my view of this, my view is that it should come under the Department of Treasury, because Treasury has the ability to borrow on a capital market. But this would be capitalized with public investment. What we've talked about and what was in President Obama's first budget was a $5 billion investment every year for 5 years. So $25 billion of capital resources from the federal government. The Treasury would be able to call on an additional $225 billion in capital. But understand, that is for potential difficulties or so forth. But the World Bank, which the United States contributes to, has never had to call on its callable capital. Never. Because the project is almost like a revolving loan fund. You're lending money. There is a revenue stream, whether it is like Mayor Villaraigosa with the half-cent sales tax, which gets this paid for. You already have water projects today, wastewater, where there are user fees attached to this, so that you are getting the money back, repaying the loan, and being able to make a return on the investment. So it isn't accurate. No one is trying. It is a capital expenditure for the federal government, but it is $5 billion a year for 5 years. And the point, again, is that this is transparent. It's not like a Freddie Mac or a Fannie Mae, which some people want to talk about it. This is not for profit. We're not worried about shareholders or executive compensation.
This is more like the FDIC or something along those lines.
It is an independent entity. An independent entity.
Government-owned.
That's right. Independent entity. It is a very conservative leverage rate. You will recall that Fannie Mae, where they're talking 30 to 1. We're talking 2.5 to 1, and that's based on what the European Investment Bank does. We're also saying there are definite revenue streams. You have creditable borrowers, and there is built into the legislation, which you have seen, is there is audit management, risk management, pieces of it. There's absolute upfront transparency in this effort. So it's totally different in that respect.
Okay, one final question.
Sure.
Obviously, the Obama administration has been talking about this a little more recently. Are there any differences between what you have proposed and what they're talking about now?
Well, I was very, very pleased to see that the president talked about an infrastructure bank. And that was a way for us to move to a national growth strategy. In the first Obama budget, there was a call for an infrastructure bank capitalized at $5 billion a year for 5 years. It did not appear in the second budget. That was a different allocation of money under the Department of Treasury. I believe we need to have, there are probably 3 principles on which we need to establish a bank. And that's the direction that I would hope and I would want to work on with the administration, that it is an independent entity, that it has a broad range of infrastructure, not just transportation, but water, wastewater, the roads, yes, bridges, yes, but energy, levees, the smart grid, the telecommunications and broadband. And the third is that the ability to attract substantial capital in order to deal with these projects of national significance. Those are the core principles. That's what I'd like to see. That's what I want to work with the administration on.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.